Good morning, my friend. Have you ever thought about how important grammar really is when it comes to speaking English?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've always believed that as long as you get your point across, who cares about grammar, right?
Right. I think people get too caught up in the rules and forget that the primary purpose of language is communication. As long as the message is clear, does it really matter if you split an infinitive or end a sentence with a preposition?
Exactly. I've met so many people who stress over grammar rules, but when they speak, they can barely hold a conversation. It's like they're more concerned about impressing others with their grammar skills than actually connecting through language.
Yeah, and you know what? Native speakers don't always follow all those grammar rules either. I mean, we use contractions, slang, and expressions all the time. It's a natural part of language evolution.
True. I think language is dynamic and it changes over time. What was considered incorrect grammar years ago might be perfectly acceptable today. Language is a living thing, after all.
Exactly. And when you think about it, some of the most famous authors and speakers have played around with grammar. They bent the rules to create a unique style, and people loved it.
Shakespeare is a great example. I mean, he made up words, twisted grammar, and people still study his work centuries later. It's not about following the rules. It's about expression and connection.
Right on. Besides, in casual conversations, people don't pause to think about whether they're using the correct tense or if they're subject and verb. They just talk, and that's the beauty of it.
Totally. I think the emphasis should be on effective communication rather than perfection. If you can convey your ideas and understand others, isn't that the ultimate goal?
You made the point. Grammar is a tool, not a master. It's there to help us communicate better, but it shouldn't hinder us. I'd rather have a meaningful, imperfect conversation than a technically flawless, but robotic one.
Preach. I feel like people who obsess over grammar are missing out on the joy of language. It's about expression, connection, and understanding, not about following a set of rigid rules.
So, the next time someone corrects your grammar, just remind them that communication is the key and grammar is just a guide, not a prison.
Absolutely. You know, I once read this article about how languages evolve and adapt to the way people speak. It mentioned how English has borrowed words from so many other languages, and grammar has shifted over time.
It just goes to show that language is a living, breathing entity. It's not meant to be stagnant. I mean, think about how technology has influenced the way we communicate. We're inventing new words and expressions all the time.
Right? Like, who would have thought selfie would become an official word in the dictionary? Language reflects our culture, and if we firmly stick to grammar rules, we might miss out on capturing the spirit of the times.
Exactly. And what about regional dialects and accents? They add so much flavor to language. Imagine a world where everyone spoke the same way. It would be so boring.
True that. I grew up in the South, and our way of speaking has its own charm. The grammar might not always align with the textbooks, but it's a part of our identity.
I love that. It's like each person brings their own linguistic fingerprint to the conversation. It's what makes language diverse and interesting.
You know what's funny? Some people think using ain't or double negatives is grammatically incorrect. But in certain contexts, it just feels right. It adds a bit of authenticity and flavor.
Yes, language is all about context. And you can't deny the power of informal language in creating a sense of intimacy and camaraderie. It's like breaking down barriers and saying, hey, we're just two people having a chat.
Spot on. Have you ever tried to have a completely formal conversation with a friend? It feels so forced and unnatural.
Yeah, it's like putting on a linguistic suit and tie. But when you let go of the grammar police and just let the words flow, conversations become more genuine and enjoyable.
Totally agree. I think we should celebrate the diversity of language and embrace the fact that communication is a dynamic, ever-changing dance.
You know, I've had my fair share of experiences where being too focused on grammar rules actually hindered communication rather than enhancing it.
Really? Share an example.
Well, there was this one time during a group discussion where I was so obsessed on using perfect grammar that I ended up stumbling over my words. I was more concerned about constructing flawless sentences than expressing my ideas clearly.
Been there. It's like the pressure to be grammatically correct can sometimes lead to performance anxiety, right?
Exactly. I realized that I was missing out on the essence of the discussion. So, I decided to loosen up a bit, embrace a more natural way of speaking, and you know what? The conversation flowed much better.
It's funny how those moments of authenticity can create a stronger connection. I had a similar experience in a language exchange program. I was so worried about my grammar being impeccable that I hesitated to speak with native speakers.
Oh, I can relate. It's like the fear of being judged for every misplaced comma or misunderstood tense.
Right? But then I met this person who was so encouraging. They didn't care about my grammar mistakes. It just appreciated the effort. It made me realize that genuine communication trumps grammatical perfection any day.
That's a great lesson. It's those genuine connections that make language learning or any conversation memorable. You remember the feeling, the shared laughter, much more than whether your subject and verb agreed perfectly.
And you know what else? Making mistakes is a natural part of learning. I started to see grammar errors as stepping stones to improvement rather than roadblocks.
Wise perspective. Embracing those mistakes not only helps us learn, but also makes the journey more enjoyable. I mean, language is a journey, not a destination, right?
Of course, it's the twists, turns, and even the occasional detours that make the linguistic adventure worthwhile.
So true. And you know what's even more interesting? Sometimes, the most memorable and profound conversations I've had were the ones where grammar took a back seat and genuine expression took the wheel.
It's like language becomes a canvas, and we paint our thoughts with words, regardless of whether the strokes are grammatically perfect.
I love that analogy. So let's keep painting our conversations with the vibrant colors of expression. Grammar rules be darned.
Absolutely. Here's to the art of conversation and the beauty of imperfect, authentic language.